My name is Emily Hayes. I'm 24 years old, and 3 weeks ago, my father kicked me out of my own mother's funeral. He stood before a church full of mourners and told me I didn't belong, while my sister smirked behind him as if the humiliation had been planned all along. What they didn't know was that before she died, my mother gave me a sealed letter and told me to trust her lawyer. Days later, at the will reading, that letter shattered every lie my father had built, naming me the sole heir to everything he thought was his. From that moment, the empire he tried to bury me under became mine, and the fight for the truth truly began. The church air felt heavy, thick with incense and whispers, but none of it touched me the way it should have. My chest wasn't only weighed down by grief, it was crushed by disbelief that this was real, that the woman I thought would always stand between me and the world was lying still beneath polished wood a few feet away. My mother had always carried herself with quiet dignity, a presence that never demanded attention yet anchored everyone around her. Seeing her coffin at the center of the aisle felt like watching the foundation of my entire life collapse without warning. People gathered in hushed groups, heads lowered, black suits pressed, tissues pressed to eyes, but their comfort meant nothing to me. All I wanted was to walk to her, place the flowers I had chosen myself, and whisper goodbye the way only a daughter could. But before my fingers brushed the bouquet against the lid, his voice struck through the silence. My father's words were sharp enough to slice through every thought, every tear I was holding back. You don't belong here. Leave. Now. For a moment, I thought I imagined it, that grief was twisting my mind, but then I saw his face. His eyes weren't swollen from tears. No, they burned with something else, with fury, with command. Every person in the room shifted, some gasping, some looking to the floor, others pretending to study the stained glass windows so they wouldn't have to see what was happening. I froze where I stood, the bouquet trembling in my hand as though even the petals knew they were unwanted. He didn't stop there. My father's tone grew louder, dripping with venom. Get out. Don't embarrass me in front of everyone. The words echoed through the church, making the organ pipes hum with the weight of his anger. His presence towered like a shadow across the aisle, demanding obedience, demanding silence. I searched the faces of relatives who had once smiled at me during holidays, who had clapped at my graduations, hoping someone would rise to my defense. No one did. They sat stiff, uncomfortable, hands clutched in their laps as though speaking would mean they'd be exiled too. And then there was my sister. She stood just behind him, half hidden, her eyes locked on me with a smile so faint and cold it chilled me more than the air inside that church ever could. It was the kind of expression that didn't need words. It told me she knew something I didn't, that she was already in on a truth meant to crush me. My throat burned as though swallowing fire, and my hands shook so badly the bouquet slipped from my grasp and scattered across the aisle. With everyone's eyes on me, my humiliation was sealed. I forced myself to turn, to walk out, each step echoing like a drumbeat of defeat. The doors closed behind me with a weighty thud, leaving me outside in the raw chill. I stood there for a moment, staring at the heavy wood as though my mother herself might open them and tell me to come back in. But all I had was silence, broken only by the faint sound of the choir inside, muffled now as though I was listening from another world. I didn't cry. Not yet. I held the tears inside until they burned my skin, until they left me with nothing but a hollow ache and a memory of my father's glare. That was the last image I carried away from my mother's funeral, not her smile, not her hands, but his rage. 2 nights later, when I sat alone in my small apartment, the envelope weighed on me more than grief itself. My mother had given it to me with trembling fingers in those final days, her voice barely a whisper. Don't open this until after I'm gone. And whatever happens, trust the lawyer I've chosen. Her eyes had locked on mine with a kind of urgency I'd never seen in her before, and now I understood why. She had known what would happen at that funeral. She had known he would try to erase me, to push me out, to make me feel as though I had no claim to her, to this family, to anything at all. I hadn't opened it yet. I kept staring at the seal, at my name written in her careful script, as though opening it would burn everything down in ways I wasn't ready for. But then the call came from the lawyer. The will would be read in 3 days, and I was expected to attend. My first instinct was hesitation. After what had happened, did I have the strength to sit in the same room with my father and sister again? But then my mother's words replayed in my mind, and I understood. She had been preparing me not just for her absence, but for a battle I hadn't seen coming. The morning of the reading, I dressed with precision, not vanity. I chose black slacks and a blouse that carried no softness, only resolve. When I walked into the law office, I kept my head high even as memories of that church pressed against me. My father was already there, seated at the center of the table like a king surveying his court. His posture radiated confidence, his smirk one of a man already certain of victory. My sister sat beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm as though cementing their alliance. Neither of them even looked at me when I entered. To them, I wasn't a rival, just a discarded shadow. The lawyer, a man in his 60s with sharp eyes and deliberate movements, began without ceremony. He opened the folder before him and started to read. The words blurred for me at first. Standard introductions, acknowledgments of assets, business holdings, the house I grew up in, accounts I'd never been allowed to touch. And with each line, I could see my father's grin deepen, as if every sentence confirmed what he already believed, that the empire my mother had built with her family's wealth was his to claim. My sister's smile mirrored his, a mirror of triumph, of expectation. Then the lawyer paused. His hand reached into his briefcase and pulled out the sealed envelope. My heart stopped. I knew that envelope. I had held it for days unopened. But this was not the same one. This was its twin, prepared by my mother to reach the table no matter what. The moment my father's eyes landed on it, his confidence cracked. His skin paled as though he had seen a ghost, and for the first time, the smirk faltered. The lawyer broke the seal and began to read aloud, my mother's words flowing across the room as if she herself had walked in. If you're hearing this, it means the truth must come out. I know what you've done. The lies, the affairs, the manipulation. You tried to erase our child from my life, but I will not let you succeed. Everything I have, every dollar, every property, every share, belongs to the one person who truly loved me without condition, my child. The silence that followed was suffocating. No one moved. No one breathed. The lawyer slid the documents across the table toward me, my name written in bold across every page. My father's hand slammed against the armrest as he shot up, stammering with words that refused to form. His power, the dominance he had wielded at the funeral, shattered in that instant. My sister's face drained of color, her earlier smirk gone, replaced by something she couldn't hide, fear. For years, my father had spun a story that I was the failure, the disappointment, the child unworthy of his pride. He had painted me as the black sheep so convincingly that even I had begun to question myself. That was why he had driven me from the funeral, because he knew if I stayed, the truth would find me. And here it was, spoken in my mother's voice, undeniable, final. The silence in that conference room lingered long after the lawyer finished reading. My father's shoulders stiffened, his fists clenched, his mouth opening and closing as though words had deserted him. He had always been a man who controlled every room he entered, but now he stood like a figure cracked down the middle, held together only by denial. My sister's eyes darted between him and me, searching for a cue on how to react, but there was no script for the scene. Nothing in their carefully constructed lies had prepared them for my mother's last stand. The lawyer remained calm, his expression unreadable. He slid the final page across the table toward me and said only, "It's all yours." His voice was steady, but beneath it I caught the faintest trace of satisfaction, as though he, too, had carried this secret for my mother and had been waiting for the day it would pierce through the facade of my father's authority. I reached for the papers, my hand steady, though inside, my pulse roared. The weight of those documents wasn't just financial. It was history rewritten in real time, proof that everything my father had tried to bury was finally clawing its way to the surface. My father's chair screeched as he shoved it back. He slammed his palm onto the table, making the pens scatter. "This is absurd," he snapped, his voice trembling with fury. "You will not take what belongs to me." His words were directed at me, but the room wasn't convinced. The lawyer's brow rose, calm as ever. "It was never yours," he said. My sister leaned toward him, whispering something sharp under her breath. Her composure was slipping. I saw the twitch in her jaw, the panic hiding behind her eyes. For years she had lived on the certainty that she and my father would be the sole heirs. She had sided with him in every cruel remark, every manipulation, because she believed loyalty would pay off in the end. Now, she was left with nothing but his rage and her own disbelief. I stood, gathering the documents into the folder with deliberate calm. "I'll be taking what my mother left me," I said. The words didn't tremble. They didn't ask permission. They landed like steel on stone. My father stepped forward, his height casting a shadow across me, but I didn't flinch. I met his stare with one of my own, and for the first time, I saw it, the crack of fear in his eyes. The lawyer cleared his throat. "The transfer of assets will be immediate. There is no contest without clear grounds," and Mrs. Hayes was thorough in her preparation. His choice of words wasn't lost on me. My mother had been planning this, quietly, carefully, knowing the storm that would come after her death. We left the office in silence, each of us pulling in different directions. My father stormed out first, pushing past the receptionist as though the building itself had betrayed him. My sister followed, quick steps matching his, whispering furiously into his ear. They didn't look back at me. I waited until they were gone, then walked out into the late afternoon air. The sky was gray, the kind of sky that pressed low, as if even the weather understood the tension breaking beneath the surface. That night, my apartment felt smaller than ever. The folder lay on my kitchen table, but I couldn't bring myself to open it again. I already knew what it contained, but it wasn't the numbers or the deeds that consumed me. It was the knowledge that my mother had built this lifeline for me in secret, against a man she once trusted. She had known something I still didn't fully understand. Why had she been so sure my father would try to erase me completely? Why had my sister smiled that day at the funeral as though she'd been waiting for my humiliation? Sleep didn't come. My phone buzzed relentlessly, unknown numbers, withheld calls. I didn't answer any of them. By morning, a message finally broke through, this time from my father's number. It wasn't a request. It was a command. "Meet me at the house tomorrow morning. Alone." The word house sat heavy in my chest. The mansion where I had grown up, where every childhood memory had been tied, both sweet and suffocating, was the one place I hadn't set foot in for years. My mother's garden still bloomed there. Her piano still sat in the parlor. It was her world, as much as his prison. I knew walking back into that space meant stepping into his territory, but I also knew I couldn't ignore him. He wouldn't let this end with one letter. The next morning, I arrived at the gates, the iron bars looming like they always had, more fortress than welcome. The guard at the booth hesitated when he saw me, uncertainty flashing across his face. My father must have left orders, because a moment later the gates opened anyway. The long drive stretched ahead, lined with trees my mother had planted, each one now seeming to lean inward, heavy with secrets. He was waiting at the top of the steps, arms folded, jaw set. My sister hovered just behind him, her expression tight. "Inside," he said, his tone clipped, leaving no room for choice. I stepped past him without responding. If he expected fear, he wouldn't find it. The house smelled the same, polished wood, faint perfume from curtains my mother had insisted on keeping, the faint echo of silence that came after she left. We walked into the study, the same room where he had held court over family decisions for decades, his trophies from business deals crowding the shelves. He closed the door, his gaze locking on me. "You think this changes anything?" he asked, voice low, controlled. "A piece of paper doesn't erase blood. You are mine, and you will do what I say." His words didn't strike like they used to. For years I had been shaped by his authority, but now, with my mother's voice still echoing in my memory, they fell flat. "This isn't about you anymore," I said. "It never was. She made sure of that." My sister finally spoke, her voice sharper than his. You don't deserve it. You were never there. You left her to handle everything while you pretended you knew better. And now you walk in and take what you didn't earn. Her words surprised me, not because of their venom, but because they carried her own truth, resentment I hadn't seen before. I turned to her, studying her face. Is that what he told you? That I left her? That I was nothing to her? She flinched, and in that instant I understood. He hadn't only lied to the world about me. He had poisoned her too. She had grown up under his shadow, taught to see me as the failure, the outcast, so she wouldn't question her own place at his side. The argument spiraled, voices colliding until the walls themselves seemed to strain under the weight of them. My father's fury, my sister's bitterness, my own resolve, it all spilled into that study like a storm breaking. He slammed his fist onto the desk. You'll ruin this family if you keep going down this path. Walk away now, and I'll make sure you still have a place. The offer was hollow. My mother hadn't written her will to give me a portion. She had written it to make sure I had everything because she knew compromise would mean surrender. I already have a place, I said, and it's not yours to give. For a moment, the silence returned. My father's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening until I thought it might shatter. My sister looked at him, waiting for direction, but I could see the doubt creeping in. For the first time, the cracks between them showed. I didn't stay longer. I turned, opened the door, and walked out of the house without looking back. He didn't call after me. He didn't stop me, but I knew this wasn't finished. His pride wouldn't allow it. He had built his entire life on control, and my mother had stripped it from him in a single stroke. He would not let that stand. Back in my apartment, the phone kept ringing. Journalists now, business associates, extended relatives who had never spoken to me before suddenly remembered my name. They wanted answers, statements, confirmation of rumors. I ignored them all. My mother's letter hadn't just left me wealth. It had left me with enemies I hadn't seen coming. That evening, another envelope arrived, slipped under my door. No return address. No handwriting I recognized. Inside was a single sheet, a photograph of my mother, dated years earlier, standing beside a man who wasn't my father. On the back, in neat script, were the words, "The truth is deeper than you think." I stared at it until the edges blurred. My chest tightened with questions that spiraled into something darker. What truth had my mother been protecting? And who wanted me to find it now, when everything was already unraveling? The photograph sat on my kitchen table all night, daring me to look at it again. My mother's face stared back, younger, smiling, her hand resting lightly on the arm of a man who was not my father. The date scrawled on the corner placed it years before my sister was born, years before the fights, years before the silence that grew in our house like a second skin. Whoever had left this wanted me to know something my mother had guarded until her death. By morning, I had made my decision. I called the lawyer. He picked up on the second ring, his voice calm as always. "I need to see you," I said. "It's important." When I slid the photograph across his desk an hour later, his expression didn't shift much, but I caught the faint hesitation in his eyes. "So you found it," he said quietly. "What does it mean?" I asked. He leaned back, his hands folding together. "Your mother prepared for this. She knew that once the will was read, your father would fight back. That photo was her way of making sure you understood the full story. The man beside her, his name is Robert Wells. He was more than a friend. He was her partner in building some of the businesses you now own. And more importantly, he was the only person she trusted when she realized her father was draining money from her accounts." I felt the weight of his words settle over me like a stone. My father had always bragged about being the mastermind behind every deal, every investment. But the truth was, my mother had built her empire quietly, and when she discovered his betrayal, she hadn't confronted him. She had gone to someone else. "Why didn't she ever tell me?" I asked. "Because she knew what would happen," the lawyer replied. "Your father would have destroyed you both if he had proof she confided in you. Instead, she left pieces behind. The letter, the will, and this photograph. She trusted that when the time came, you'd put them together." The The room felt smaller, tighter. My father hadn't only tried to erase me, he had tried to erase her truth, rewriting the story of her life until it served only him. And now I had the final piece. By the afternoon, another message came. This time, not a command, but an invitation written in my father's handwriting. Come to the house tonight. We end this. I knew what it meant. He was cornered, desperate, but he still believed he could intimidate me into surrender. He didn't understand that my mother had already stripped him of his power. The mansion looked different at night, shadows stretching long across the lawn, windows glowing faintly from the study. I pushed open the door without knocking. My father was waiting inside, his figure framed by the fire behind him. My sister sat to his right, her arms folded tightly, her face pale. He didn't waste time. You've humiliated me, he said. Dragged this family's name through the dirt. Do you think anyone will respect you after this? You're naive if you believe those businesses will stay afloat under your control. You'll lose everything, and when you do, don't expect me to pick up the pieces. I set the photograph on the desk between us. His eyes flicked to it, and after so many years, I saw genuine fear break through the mask. My sister leaned forward, confusion clouding her face. What is that? She asked. I didn't let him answer. It's the truth. Mother didn't build her empire with you. She built it in spite of you. And she wasn't alone. She knew you were bleeding her accounts dry. She knew you'd try to erase me. That's why she left everything in my name. My sister's face drained of color as she looked at him. You told me she wanted this family united. You told me she left it to you, and I would share it with you. Was any of that true? He didn't respond. His jaw locked, his silence louder than words. This is who he is, I said, my voice cutting through the tension. He's been lying to both of us our entire lives. He tried to convince you I was nothing so you wouldn't question him. But Mother saw him for what he was. That's why she gave me everything, to protect her legacy from being devoured. The room erupted. My sister stood, shouting at him, demanding answers. He tried to calm her, tried to twist it into another lie, but the cracks were too deep now. She saw him clearly. Maybe you used me, she said, her voice shaking. All these years, I thought I was on your side. But you never planned to share anything with me, did you? He slammed his hand on the desk. Enough. His voice boomed, but it no longer carried the weight it once had. The empire was gone. His lies were unraveling. His control was slipping, and he knew it. I stepped forward, my voice steady. It's over. The businesses are mine. The house, the accounts, everything. You can fight, but you'll lose. And when you do, there will be nothing left of your reputation. Or you can accept the truth, step aside, and live with what little dignity you have left. For a long moment, he didn't move. The fire crackled behind him, the only sound in the room. Then his shoulders sank, the fight draining out of him. He looked at me, not as a father, not even as an enemy, but as a man who had lost everything. You think you've won, he muttered, but you've inherited a war. Everyone who wanted a piece of your mother's empire will come for you. You're not strong enough to survive them. I held his gaze. I'll survive. Because she believed I could. My sister turned away from him, her face hardening. I won't stand by you anymore, she said. Not after this. She walked past me, out of the study, her footsteps echoing down the hall. He was truly alone. I picked up the photograph, sliding it back into my bag. This was her last word. I told him, not yours. Then I left. Outside, the night air was cold, sharp against my skin. The mansion loomed behind me, but it no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a relic, a monument to the lies my father had built and the truth my mother had preserved. In the weeks that followed, the transition wasn't easy. Lawyers, board members, journalists, all of them wanted something. My father disappeared from the spotlight, his empire reduced to whispers about betrayal and downfall. My sister kept her distance, though sometimes I wondered if she blamed me or if she was simply trying to rebuild herself after years of living in his shadow. But the businesses held. The accounts remained. And I walked into meetings not as the forgotten daughter, not as the black sheep, but as the heir my mother had chosen. Every signature I placed on a contract, every decision I made, carried her voice behind it. She had trusted me to protect what she built, and I would not fail her. The photograph stayed with me, locked in a drawer. Not as a weapon, but as a reminder. My mother had lived her life surrounded by lies, but she had carved out a truth that could not be buried. And when it mattered most, she passed that truth to me. I never saw my father again after that night. Rumors said he left the country. Others said he lived quietly in a small town, stripped of the power he once clung to. It didn't matter. His story had ended. Mine was only beginning. And through it all, one thought stayed with me. At her funeral, he had tried to drive me out, to erase me in front of everyone. But in the end, it was him who walked away with nothing, silenced not by me, but by the woman he could never control. My mother's last word wasn't in the will, or the letter, or the photograph. It was in the life she left me to live, and I intended to honor it.